I'm Amy Shuman. I'm one of Dan's students. And actually, Dan was my advisor from the moment that I arrived. You probably don't know that, but at Penn, I was appointed to you. And then, and he guided me through my course selection and complained about how many methodology courses I took. Like 7. Well, I took 7, and you said something like, I think 7 is a bit much. So, and was on my committee for my dissertation as well. So it's just an enormous pleasure for me to be able to do this interview. I wanted to start, yes.
I can't hear you without a microphone.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to have to leave if I can't hear you.
Okay, no, I'm going to use the microphone as well.
Excellent. Please do.
Okay.
So I'm just doing an introduction right now, and then I'll sit down because you don't need to hear as much from me. But when I ask a question, I'll come back to the mic. So I was just saying that what a pleasure it is for me to do this interview with Dan. And I wanted to say that my idea about it was to have several different genres. And so give Dan the opportunity to do some praise genre, to do some personal disclosures, and to kvetch, to complain. So, go ahead. So maybe legends. So we're starting sort of in the legend era. So my first question is, I wanted you to take us back into your history. And many people did not hear your comments about Dovnoy last night. So although you just talked about him, I'm hoping that you won't mind repeating a lot of that. And talk about what it was like to work with Dovnoy, with Stith Thompson, and others. And the larger question is, what do you want us to remember about those people who came before you? He has one.
I have a mic. Do you hear me? Yeah. Let me tell you how did I start in folklore and how I met Dovnoy. I entered the Hebrew University, I think it was 1957. And I started we had to take 2 majors at that time, and then there were some electives. I chose as my major biblical studies and English literature. And this was kind of an odd combination at the Hebrew University, because people who took biblical studies would take probably the history of the Hebrew language or Hebrew literature. And in spite of the fact that this was an odd combination, I enjoyed it. But what I didn't enjoy was the fact that in biblical studies, I was not allowed to take courses with the leading professors at the time as a first-year student. I was assigned to, and this was sort of by instruction of the chair of the department, that freshmen in biblical studies need to take basic courses, and some of the basic courses were boring, at least for me at that time. And at the end of the year, I decided to switch to a major and to switch to Hebrew literature. Hebrew literature, the chairman of Hebrew literature at that time was a poet and a writer and a great scholar, Shimon Halkin. And the department was divided into several historical sections of Hebrew literature. Midrash and Agadah, which is late antiquities, medieval studies, rabbinical literature, but not from rabbinical point of view, but from literary point of view, and then modern literature. And I began to interview, and this is what I did, the heads of these sections, so that they will allow me to finish the major, the BA, without losing the year that I lost for biblical studies. I learned a great deal, but in my perspectives of a student, a BA student, this was an efficient way to do it. So I went to Dovnoy, and he accepted me. He agreed to the arrangement. He said, provided you take a seminar and an introduction class at the same year. So that's okay. I didn't realize that at that time, but he was in '57, just let's say 2 years at the Hebrew University, just came back from Indiana. For me, he was sort of a distinguished professor. You know, you have to understand the perspectives that we had as younger people. Say, I hate to consider myself an older person, but that's what it was. And I would say, I liked this literature, partially because in my parental home we had a book edited by Bialik, the great Hebrew poet of the first half of the 20th century, that he edited for the public, let's say, not professional readers, book of the Agadah. It's known as Sefer HaAgadah. It's now available in English translation. And I like this literature. I like the style and the language of that period. And Dov Noy took me into the seminar. And I went into it, you know, so I liked it. Let's say I liked the way that he taught. I liked the assignments that he gave us. And at the end of the year, I won sort of a prize. I didn't get money, but let's say my term paper was singled out as one of the 2 best term papers in the seminar, judged by outside committee, not by Dov Noy himself. And the meeting that I mentioned in Far Mikha, Sdot Mikha, was a place where sort of I was given the award for the paper. The other person that got it was Yaakov Alboin, who became a professor at the Hebrew University. And I was not involved at that time in any of his collecting activities. At that time, he didn't bring it into the seminars. So I studied it basically as literature from a literary point of view. I did a motif analysis and all the other things that he required the students to do, and began to approach the Agadah as folklore. He was a very warm person, very kind, informal with his students. And let's say you have to understand that, say this is a quotation that I would give from a person, Chaim Tadmor, who was a neighbor of Dov Noy, but a professor of ancient antiquities of Mesopotamia and Akkadic literature. And he said at that time, at one point he said to me, that the Hebrew University was the last German university. There was a lot of formality between the students and the professors. With Dov Noy, we didn't have these formalities. So after the BA, I took 1 year of MA, and then I asked him I said I would like to proceed to a PhD. Where shall I do it? Let's say we couldn't do it at the Hebrew University, and he suggested go to Bloomington, Indiana. So you have to understand, I knew about New York and I knew about Los Angeles, but I didn't know about America and what was in between. Yes, I read stories and things of that sort, but in terms of my thinking, I had to say Bloomington, Indiana, looked it up in the map, and here I am, you know. Later on, we had very close connections. We not corresponded so much, but whenever he came to the United States, whenever I came to Israel, we met, let's say, his Monday evenings open house are famous, and I attended several of them. And we had sort of a student-mentor relations and also collegial relations. As I mentioned in the eulogy last night, Dorson was preparing the series of Folk Tales of the World with the University of Chicago Press. Dov Noy presented him the text in translation and introduction for the Folk Tales of Israel, but there was not, the annotations were not sufficient at that point, and Dorson asked me to work on it. And I did, and this was sort of, the book appeared as edited by Dov Noy with the assistance of Dan Ben-Amos. And when Alan Frankel, who was the director of the editor-in-chief and later also director of the Jewish Publication Society, had the great idea of publishing tales from the archive, she approached me after the suggestions of Dov Noy, and as we walked out of the White Door Cafe and agreeing about it, and so we talked and things of that sort, and he said to me, for me this is closing of a circle, you know, and this is what I said. And for me it was not only for all of us an opening of a way, because I haven't learned about Jewish folklore as much as I learned doing these volumes. And I have to be grateful to him for giving me this opportunity to
learn. Okay, now we're in Indiana. So the next question is really about the people you studied with at Indiana and what it was like in that time, what folklore was like in that time, because we're next, just to anticipate, we're going to move on beyond that to the period of the Young Turks. But first we have to hear about the period before that, when you were in Indiana, the people you were studying with, and what we can know, for example, about Richard Dorson, about Stith Thompson, and any of the others you want to mention.
Yeah, I should say that by the time that I came to Indiana, Stith Thompson didn't teach.
Oh.
Yeah, he was retired, and I think he was already living in Indianapolis. I think there was one time that Warren Roberts had a heart attack, and I think he came back to teach the Folklore class. But I didn't take any courses with Stith Thompson. I saw him around, and I still have some off-prints that he put on the table for people to take, and I took one of them. Let me tell you something about Indiana at that time. And the folklore at that time. There was a separate library of folklore on the second floor of, I don't remember how, of the library building. As you enter the campus, the library at that time was on your left, on one of the older buildings, and on the second floor, there were the offices of the folklore department and a seminar library. Now, this was basically the bar of all the students. This is where we hanged out. You couldn't talk in the library, but there was a sort of a lobby in front of it, and this is where we argued, we talked. After class, we disagreed with the teacher. This was really a the club of the department as far as the students are concerned. And it was very easy, because whenever you had some argument, let's say you just go to the library, which is ahead near you, and take the book and argue and have all the evidence and argument pro and the con right there. The teachers at Indiana, Dawson was the director of the program. As all of you know, and I don't think that I'm saying anything new, he was the last choice of the administration. When Steve Thompson retired, they wanted, as far as I remember, Kurt Ranke to teach, to take the directorship of the institute that they had. He didn't want to leave Göttingen, leave Germany. So they went to Christensen from Sweden, and they brought him for a year. And Jerome Mintz studied with him, but he didn't want to stay there. Bloomington, it was not the place for him. So they approached Wayland Hand. UCLA countered the offer for Wayland Hand with an offer for him to have an institute or a center for the study of folklore and mythology. So Richard Dawson was a young professor at Michigan State University, and they turned to him. He brought into the institute a lot of energy. He was an historian by education, but he took a seminar with Melville Herskovitz on folklore and anthropology, and was enamored by folklore, American folklore, and brought into it an historical approach. You know, I think Archer Taylor, let's say, when he reviewed the American folklore of Richard Dawson, pointed out that this is a new approach to folklore in America and basically in general. We had a weekly general seminar. This was convened in the evenings. And basically these were weekly lectures, sometimes by faculty, sometimes by guest speakers. And this basically opened for all of us the world of folklore. Richard Dawson himself was an inspiring and motivating teacher. Among the other teachers that we had, let's say, I would like to single out, let's say, David Bidney, who was in the anthropology department, was a trained philosopher, studied Spinoza, and wrote about Spinoza in his dissertations. But when he got out of school, out of Yale, he didn't get any job. Partially at that time, and I don't know whether you are aware of it, but there was still a quota against Jewish scholars. Edward Sapir was admitted to Yale, but was not allowed into the faculty club at Yale, and because of his Jewishness. So Wenner Gren gave David Bidney a fellowship, basically allowed the university to have a scholar there for a year or 3 years, I don't know how long, and to get him integrated into the university, and if he succeeds, he becomes a regular faculty, and if he does not, I don't know what it would have been. Well, David Bidney succeeded. And his major contribution to anthropology, and anthropologists didn't always like it, is testing or putting the theories of anthropology to philosophical critiques. And his book that was published in 1953 by Columbia University Press is theoretical anthropology, collection of essays that are to me they are very important. Let's say when I came to the University of Pennsylvania and mentioned to Ward Goodenough that I studied with David Bidney, he sort of put him down, kind of, not in any great way, but let's say didn't appreciate him that much. But at Indiana, at Bloomington, all the students that had any kinds of anthropological interest studied with him. Let's say Alan Dundas took courses with David Bidney, Ellie Congas Miranda took courses with David Bidney. His course on theories of myth still guides me in my teaching of theories of myth. I don't teach it anymore now, but probably I hope to return to this course. Erminie Voglin also taught us folklore of the American Indians. I took a course with Jerome Mintz. Later on, he became my collaborator on the translation of In Praise of the Baal Shem Tov. Edson Richmond taught us the ballad course, where Warren Roberts taught us the course on the folktale. Then you have to understand, say that Thomas Sibiak was part of the folklore department, but didn't teach actual courses in the folklore department. In 1962, Dawson organized the Folklore Institute. And we all wanted a course on structural analysis. Thomas Sibiak said, okay, I'm ready to offer the course, but I'm not going to teach the course because I have a conference here and a conference there, and my summer is very busy. So Alan Dundas took upon himself to be sort of the chair of the course, but this was a student-run seminar. Bob Georges was in the seminar, Ellie Congas Miranda. Pierre Miranda came to this seminar from Harvard because he wanted to study structural analysis. And there he met Ellie Congas, that after a year added the name Miranda to her name. I was a best man in their wedding. And in several times she came to my house to call Pierre, who returned to Canada, to his monastery, but there was a receptionist at the monastery, so she couldn't have a woman voice calling Pierre, so I was calling him, and then when he was on the phone, I handed the phone to her and they talked. The seminar that Alan Dundas ran was really one of the most important seminars that I took, not only because of the subject matter, but because the nature of the atmosphere that was in the seminar. You know, without I was about to say parental authority, but a teacher's authority, students gave papers, reports, and discussions. When Thomas Sibiak returned, he had about 2 weeks to finish off the course, and he said, this was the best seminar that I never taught. You are talking about the young Turks. What you have to understand that the young Turks were baby Turks at Bloomington, Indiana, because at that time we all ask the question, what is folklore? There were several points of challenge to the whole concept of folklore. You have to understand the textbook that we used in the introduction to folklore was Crappy, The Science of Folklore. This is a book that was written in the 30s. Crappy was a tremendous scholar. They don't come anymore, with the languages that this man knew, and I read some articles about that he wrote later on, and a profound scholar. But in 1960s, the book The Science of Folklore did not hold our enthusiasm. So, following some of the discussions that we had with David Bidney, who was very interested in folklore, we all sort of looked for a definition of folklore. Say, what is it? What is it that we are studying? You have to understand there were, Eli Congas Miranda, there were other people that you know about, you don't know about. Joe Hickerson was not exactly in the same class of mine, but in the group. Barbara Klein was in the same class of mine. Alan Dundas and Bob Georges were a little bit ahead. Dick Bauman was there at Indiana after he got an MA, he moved to American Civ at University of Pennsylvania, where he took courses with Dale Himes and moved into combined American Civ and anthropology. Judy McCullough was there, and she was involved in the archive of traditional music at the time. There were, some friends. Neil Rosenberg was there, another ballad specialist that I lost touch with, John Patterson, who was a good friend of mine. I think he is at Harrisburg, or was at Harrisburg for a while.
He was.
Yeah.
He's now in Vermont.
Oh, really? Yeah. Give him my regards. Tell him that I mentioned. Yeah. Him and his wife Fiona were good friends of mine, and for me it was a completely different sense of a university. I wrote it in sort of a brief note that sometimes circulates around about my first day in Bloomington, Indiana. I came to secure an apartment, to find an apartment. And I went to the office residence office, got a list, and then I thought I should meet my professor. So I asked, where is Professor Dawson? They didn't know, he was not in the folklore office, and then somebody directed me to Ballantyne Hall, to the history department there. I found my way into the department, and as I entered the office, what I heard, somebody shouts to the secretary, they spelled child with an E at the end. And then I saw a professor with Bermuda shorts and Hawaiian shirts, and I thought, this cannot be a professor, All my professors were dressed. And I introduced myself, and he was very kind. And I explained to him what I want to do to accomplish. I had about a day and a half, or an afternoon. He took me in his Volkswagen and followed one address after the other. And he was not a good driver, the car jerked all the time. And this is the way this was my introduction to folklore in Bloomington, Indiana. What I said in this small piece that I wrote, this is a piece that an issue of the Folklore Forum that Dick Royce edited, asking students to write how they got into folklore, because this was a general question that Dawson asked. Folklore was not taught as an undergraduate classes, so he usually asked students. So I wrote, I came to Bloomington, Indiana, I saw the old man sitting on the porch smoking corn pipes and swinging on the porches there, and I thought to myself, I'm in the wrong movie set, this cannot be a university town. And I said, and then I went and I met Dawson, and he was so nice and so warm and welcoming that I said, I'll stay there after all, and I did.
That's great. Well, sort of looking here.
You've mentioned a little bit about it, but I'm sure everyone, when they heard you say that all the students would get together and argue, we all want to know some of what you argued about. So what were some of you said some of it was what is folklore, but we'd like to hear more about what those arguments were.
I think the questions of what is folklore was the central piece of the argument. You have to understand that at that time, one of the major problems of folklore at that time was what was it called? It is a allocation of money for studying that the government gave for Title IV, it was called. I'm not sure about the bureaucratic section of it, but the government gave money to encourage the study of foreign languages and also foreign cultures, let's say, centers for studying Russian literature, Russian, this was the post-Sputnik period, and America felt very competitive, and there was an interest in promoting studies of other cultures and languages. And initially there was money in it for folklore. And this money was taken away from folklore because of the image that folklore was a communist plot. And you have all these folk singers running around with their guitars and promoting anti-American feelings. Well, Dawson fought these decisions, and he published his paper, his argument before the committee. It appeared in the Journal of American Folklore. You can find it out somewhere. So a basic question was, are all these folk singers, is this folklore or isn't it folklore? Joan Baez, we all loved her, but is she a representative of folklore? And you have to understand that, let's say, Joe Hickerson was there, John Patterson, Neil Rosenberg. There were several people who were very committed to the study of the folk song tradition. This was an issue. I remember Pete Seeger came to Indiana to attend a conference of ethnomusicological conference. And Joe Hickerson was a friend of Pete Seeger. So after the sessions in the conferences, he arranged an evening for the students in a cafe near the campus with Pete Seeger. And this was a memorable evening for us because Pete Seeger was not in a crowd, not let's say 10,000 people, but let's say about 10, 20 people. It was dark, dimmed light room, and he talked. And one of the things that he mentioned, and he began to sing it, is the songs, "Where Have All the Flowers Gone?" Don't ask me to sing it because you will run away. And he said, when he began to sing this song, so he got a message from Marlene Dietrich, who wanted to sing these songs, and then asked him, "Do you have some other songs that I can use?" And he said, "No, this is a song that I wrote." And let's say he didn't write many songs. And why did he write these songs? Because he read the book Quiet Flows the Dawn by Sholokhov, I think is the name of I don't know whether I pronounce it correctly. And it says that the prisoners were walking and singing the songs Quiet Flows the Dawn. Where have all the flowers gone? And he began to ask Russian colleagues or Russian singers, "Do you know this song?" And nobody knew this song. So he said, "I'll write this song," and this became one of his popular songs. Is it folklore or isn't it folklore? You know. So there were all kinds of dimensions to the popularity. In some way, the popularity of the folk song movements, the festivals, the Newport Festival, the Philadelphia Folk Song Festival, were somewhat of a threat to the academic study of folklore. And as you all recall, Dawson made his rise in American and in folklore scholarship by publishing in 1956 an article in the American Mercury, Folklore. And he was very proud of this article, and basically this was his pulpit for establishing folklore. I remember just, Dan, let me just mention to you, when we talked about folklore and folklore at Indiana, Dawson mentioned you favorably by saying Dan Yoder is doing the right things and the right work rather than all the touristic type of Pennsylvania Dutch art that was going around.
I can't resist following up only because I've had conversations with you about that in a class, about that article, and you mentioned at the time Dawson's attitude toward Bodkin, and that's a piece of that. So there's a personal dimension, as I recall, in Dawson's attitude toward Bodkin.
I don't know whether it is personal in the...
No, I don't mean as an animosity.
Yeah, I think if I interpret Dawson correctly, and I may not, for him, scholarship and personal were infused. Yeah. And he didn't like the whole popular production of treasuries of folklore, treasury of American folklore, treasury of Southern folklore, treasury of that folklore, that region, and another region. There is also a treasury of Jewish folklore that came along at that time. One of the stories that he told is, and I don't know whether you know about this person, Jagendorf, who also published popular American folk tales. And Dawson was very proud telling this story that he came to Europe to a conference, and the European asked him, what chair does Jagendorf hold? He says, the dentist chair. You know, he was a dentist that was an amateur publisher, writer of folk tales. So the relationship with Batkin, let's say, Dawson did mention very favorably the first book, I don't know whether it is the complete first book of Lay My Burden Down, the slave narratives of that Batkin wrote. And he considered it a legitimate scholarship, and this is, for him, was a good book. He didn't like, let's say, you have to understand that in some way probably I was influenced by that, and inherited this spirit both from Dove and from Dawson, the concern about the academic and scholarly and systematic approach to the material that is folklore. And the folklore is, the substance of it is indeed a vulnerable material, because it is possible to popularize it. It is possible to make profit out of it, even financially, rather than approaching like you would approach history, anthropology, literature, with theoretical tools, with ideas, with an approach that will not be necessarily scientific in the sense of physics and biology, but will be methodological and systematic. And I think Dawson saw in the other side basically a threat to the academic position in folklore. In the 1962 Institute, he invited Batkin for a weekend of basically all the, what we consider the luminaries of folklore at the time. Archer Taylor taught at the Institute, but Batkin came for a weekend, and on the stage there was an exchange of a peace pipe between Batkin and Dawson. And when Dawson got off the stage, or later on, he said, come on, I don't believe this ritual. I am still against him and against his approach. So, but I don't think it was a personal vendetta.
No, I didn't mean personal in that way. I meant what you said.
Yeah.
Okay, then let's move on to the Young Turks. I'm especially interested in asking about your role, your personal role, in shifting the paradigm of folklore studies away from the idea of only text alone. Not that people shouldn't do textual studies, and you have. So that's what's part of what's interesting. Yeah. And also, you've said some of what precipitated that shift in folklore studies, but we're very interested in your role in that shift.
Yeah, I think, I don't know what my role was. Let's say, I can tell about what I did, but let's say you'll tell me what my role was. I think what you have to understand that the Young Turks was a creation of Dawson. In his book Introduction to Folk Life, I think it is called, he republished the essay that he published in Current Anthropology in 1963, Theories in Folklore, and added a supplement, an added chapter to it, and said, a section, and here we have new voices, the Young Turks, and he called us Young Turks. There was no conference or any meeting, let's say the Young Turks, the real Young Turks, I think probably met at some point when they developed their revolutions. We did not. We knew of each other, of his work. We read each other, and there was a certain directions that led to it. I was teaching at UCLA the year before I wrote this paper, and had a lot of conversations about Georges, continuing from our days at Indiana. A publisher, an agent, came to me and said to me that they had an excellent idea in their publishing house, not to ask to have introduction to fields that will not be written by the great scholars in the field, by young beginners. Because as Thomas Kuhn in his Structure of Scientific Revolutions points out, introduction that are written by established scholars basically write about the past, about what happened in the scholarships in their 20 or 30 years of academic involvement. But they had the great idea of asking young scholars to develop what they think will be the future of the discipline. Somebody gave this agent my name, and they vetted me probably, and I just came, let's say, the year before from Africa, from my work in Benin, and they said, are you ready to write an introduction to folklore? Now, think about yourself. If you are the first year of teaching and somebody asks you to write an introduction to folklore, would you turn it down? No. I said, sure, I will write an introduction to folklore. And then I moved to the University of Pennsylvania in 1967. And let me also preface that. The American Folklore Society met for the first time alone, without the Modern Language Association or the American Anthropological Association, in 1966 in Boston. I was already at, yes, November 1966 in Boston. I was already in UCLA at that time, but I missed the deadline of submitting papers. So I did not go to the meetings. And I thought, well, I'll not miss the 1967 meetings. So by the time that there was a time to submit the titles of papers, I was thinking about the book, the introduction to folklore, and the first chapter should be definition of folklore. The meeting the paper was written sort of between boxes that are unpacked, moving to a new house, a new place. The meeting was in Toronto, Canada. I came with my paper, and I was in a session that D.K. Wilgus chaired, and Alan Lomax was the first person that read the paper, and I think Barry Tolkien read another paper, and I don't remember. I have I didn't know that you are going to ask about it, but I have in my computer the program from that year, and there was another person, and I was the last to read my paper. D.K. Wilgus got impatient. So I was not over time. Alan Lomax took the time, but people were beginning to be hungry, and the time. So he said, "Quick!" So I cut the major part of my paper and read the conclusions. There was no immediate reaction from the audience. I prepared a paper for publications, and I sent it to John Greenway, who was the editor of the journal at that time. I got back an angry letter. You Indiana people try to define folklore all the time, and you don't even mention my own definitions of folklore, and I reject the paper. But he said, "I'll tell you what, this is the last issue of the journal that I'm editing. The next journal editor will be Americo Paredes, and I'll forward the paper to him." Instead of my paper, I found in the Journal of American Folklore a note written by Roger Welch, who studied with us at Indiana, criticizing my definition of folklore. And say, by the way, I called the title of the paper was "The Definition Game Once Again." And Roger Welch picked up on that and again said definitions are a matter of dictionary, of philology. There is no point of what Dan was doing. Luckily for me, Dick Bauman came to my help. And the next issue included a note by Dick Bauman pointing out, he said, if there was anybody that gave the wrong title to his paper, it was Dan Ben-Amos, a faulty choice of titles. This is a paper that, a definition of paper that makes a shift toward behavioral study of folklore. I didn't know that that's what I was doing. I was doing, I can explain to you what I was doing, but let's say this is not the issue now.
Now tell us, what were you doing? This is artistic communication in small groups. Everyone can quote.
Well, I'll tell you. So the reason that the things are fresh in my mind now is that over the summer, I attended a meeting in Tarragona, Catalonia, a meeting that was in memory of a great Catalonian scholar, Pujol, Joseph Pujol, who died a few years ago. And I was invited by the person, by Carme Oriol, who teaches at the university there, to the conference, and she asked me to speak about Pujol. And I said, I haven't read his work, I cannot. She said, obviously you cannot, because if you don't know Catalan, you cannot read his work. But he read your work, and he liked it very much. So would you give a paper in his honor? And I wrote a paper about my definition of folklore that he liked, So these things are somewhat fresh in my mind. What I try to do is asking myself, basically, what is folklore, not in our books, but in reality, in social life. What is the way that people designate something that is folkloric. My starting point was, if I'll go through some of the things in the article. I asked myself in that case, what are the various disciplines? What do they study? And I came to the conclusion, with the help with Whitehead as the philosopher, that what they study is processes. Not, let's say, all the historians that go through the archives and get all the facts basically are looking for processes of causal and effect processes, but they have to do it precisely and properly along chronological lines. If you are looking at literature, you are asking yourself about the process of creations, the process of, in that case, and I asked what is the process, and they said communication. But there are many forms of communications, you know. So I asked myself, what is the part of communications that distinguish folklore from others? And I used, thanks to Russian formalism and Roman Jakobson and Del Heims and all kinds of other scholars, you have to understand this definition of folklore may sound original, but it is a distillations of many of all my readings up to that time. I learned from other people. I'm not really that, well, maybe all of us do it, you know. You learn from other people and you put your 2 dimes into it. So I said artistic, but then it was not sufficient. And I suggested this is artistic in small groups. And I tried to strip away from the conception of folklore all the attributes that we give to that out of theoretical thinking and popular ideas about what is folklore. And I wrote a second paper that basically should have been first, the idea of folklore, in which I list about 9 attributes to folklore that I think we should not take them as presuppositions. If folklore is traditional, it should be found as a result of research rather than of a definitional dimension of. Now, the paper, it took 4 years for the paper to be published because Americo Paredes and Dick Bauman, who was his associate editor at that time, thought that this was a good time to have a theoretical issue of folklore. And you have articles there. I don't need to recite to you, you know, Del Heims, Dick Bauman, Kenneth Goldstein, Alan Dundas. We all contributed a dimension to the definition, the new conception of folklore. Were we young Turks? We did not conspire. There was no conspiracy here. We expressed what we thought. In 1971, the meeting of folklore, 1972, the meeting, the paper was published in 1971. The meeting of folklore in 1972 was in Austin, Texas. And D.K. Wilgus was the president of the society at that time, and he gave the presidential address that was later published and with the title, "The Text is the Theme." Basically, Dick Bauman and I were sitting in the audience, and glancing at each other because, again, you have to understand, both of us were beginners, pishers that just came out of graduate school. And the president of the society takes the time to demolish our work. Well, it means we did something important, something significant, and we enjoyed it. I must admit also that, let's say, 40 years later, I just came from, say, this summer, I attended the meeting of the International Society of Folk Narrative Research in Vilnius, Lithuania, and I met many European folklorists folklorists from India that I don't know whether they have just read the definition, but they found it meaningful to their thinking and meaningful to their sort of giving them some new ways and basically questions, also ways to question it. I'll conclude this session, not this session, but let's say these comments by telling you that I received 2 weeks ago an email from a high school student from Baltimore, not Baltimore, but let's say from Maryland. And she wrote to me, I think it is a she, I'm not sure. She wrote to me, I am in sort of a program in high school of advanced students, and we have to write a research paper that will deal with the scholarship and make a contribution of our own to the field. I read your paper, The Myth of Jewish Humor, that basically is an application of my definition of folklore. This is the reason. And I liked it, and would you be my mentor for writing my project? And I, of course, agreed, because I like this type of contact with students.
Great.
Well, you've already mentioned that you did this work in Benin, but I was going to shift here and ask you to speak first about your work in Jewish folktales. You've sort of said something about that, but then I'm interested in the shift that you made to do the work in Benin and whether you needed to do, whether there was a paradigm shift involved or whether the work translated easily from the work on Jewish folktales. We're going to come back to Jewish folklore also later.
Yeah, Amy, thank you for pointing it out to me. It's in my paper in Tarragona, and I think I'm correct in, saying there is always a danger of retrospects, because in some way you build up your own biography as a result of the later, there is an activism in retrospect. But I think that the experience in Benin was a formative influence. It had a formative effect on me, and a formative effect on thinking about the definition of folklore. Because until then, my contact with folklore was through books. I read the Midrash and the Agadah. I read materials in English also, so I don't command too many languages. I'd have loved to know also ancient Greek and Latin and Arabic. I don't know them, unfortunately, but I read these materials. In Bloomington, I took a class with Jerome Means on fieldwork. And this was my first work that I stopped with live narrators. Let's say, I taught one of the things that I did in Bloomington was teaching students how to pronounce Hebrew in the modern way, because their teacher, Henry Fischel, was a German Jew, came from Canada to Bloomington, and his pronunciation left something to be desired as far as modern Hebrew. And I mentioned to the students that this is what I'm interested in. I have an assignment to collect folklore. So one student said, come and record my mother. She's a wonderful joke teller. I got an invitation to their Friday night dinner, and this was also a shift in my scholarship, let's say, recording folk tales. But the real experience was in Benin, Nigeria. There I met storytellers, amateur storytellers, professional storytellers. I attended rituals in the shrines, not in recording, not in any descriptions of shrines. Folklore was a tradition, a live effect. I'll say to you, I just sort of, because of other circumstances, I looked at something that I wrote for inner publications about folklore at the University of Pennsylvania. And the question was, how do you become, what is unique about folklore? And in Benin, I had a very good friend who was a poet, a native poet, Ikpemosa Osameke. And he was a person that had probably 6 years of, 2 grades of high school. He was didn't have formal education, but was the most intelligent person that I ever met. Really intelligent, sophisticated, intellectual, creative, and we got along very well. And he said to me at one point, he said, look, let's say, when we want to study the tradition of Benin, we go to diviners who preserve ancient language. We go to chiefs. We go to other people who are known to be sort of preservers of the language. How did you know to go to Iditwa? This was one of the narrators that I recorded, and record his stories that are so rich. And I said to him, well, for that you need to be a folklorist. So there was both the preparation for coming to the field and really a flooding, if you can say, if I can use a psychological term, of folklore in the area. So this is a written text, and there were scholars there. Their folklore was not studied sufficiently, and it was alive. I'll give you one example. Before coming to Benin, I went to England to meet Robert Bradbury, who was the anthropologist who did work in Benin. Unfortunately and sadly, he died at the age of 40 from pneumonia because he was a heavy smoker and didn't survive pneumonia. But I met him before that. And I asked him naively for advice. And he said to me, well, you should find your own way in the field. You know, he was a tough anthropologist in that regard. It turned out, when I came to Benin, that he interviewed one of the best storytellers that I came without knowing that he was a storyteller. For him, he was a priest in a cult, the Ovia cult, which is, and he wrote on the basis of the information that he did, who I gave him, a very important paper about the cult of Ovia in Benin. He didn't know anything about storytelling. When I, with the help of other people, I didn't do it by myself, worked on the epic that Iditwa told me, and he told the epic for a night and a half. On the tapes, it is 10 hours, you know, there were some breaks. He said at one point, and I have it on the tapes, tell the white man to stop the machine, I'm going to pee. So there were all kinds of breaks there, but let's say we are talking about 10 hours. You need to be a folklorist to discover these people. When I came and I asked about storytellers, they said, yeah, we used to have them, but we don't have them anymore. And I was told about this man, and I went to his village and met him and invited and arranged that this is the way I did it. I didn't record people individually, but I set the context in which they used to perform, and this was sort of a party in the house, in the compound of a chief. I brought him in and he played, and in the morning he said, and this was from 9 o'clock till 7 o'clock in the morning, and in the morning he said, and if you want to hear the end of the story, you need to come to my village and record it. So this is what I did. So I think the fieldwork had a very formative and important influence on my definition of folklore. The work in Benin, and I went several times again, visited the place, and I still now I'm in touch with the son of Ikpemosa Osamege, who studied at the University of Benin, believe it or not, computers. And from time to time I get an email message from him and I write to him. And I'm in touch with John Vedomsky, who now is in California, who is married to Rebecca Reisi, who is a linguist from Benin, and they both were very helpful to me in my work there.
So I'm guessing then that the course that you taught on the folktale at University of Pennsylvania, which was known as a particularly rigorous course, people were afraid of it, that it must have been very different than the course that you had taken. And I also should mention that a group of us used to meet at there was that cafeteria that was on campus at the time, and we used to meet to prepare for the class, probably arguing very much like you and other students did at Indiana, both before and after, that groups of people preparing and arguing about the next version of it, which you taught. So how was it different?
Well, it was different in many ways. You have to understand that my paper for Warren Roberts was an exercise in historic geographic analysis of a particular tale. And we did a lot of motif analysis and studying the history of folktale research in Europe. In 1958, Thomas Sibiak, published a prop, The Morphology of the Folktale. And for us, this was a new way of looking at folk tales and folk narratives. And I remember in my class, let's say, I brought in a prop, and Warren Roberts was very angry. You know, he said, he didn't say I don't want to discuss it, but let's say he did not appreciate bringing prop into the discussion. You have to understand that in 1962, Alan Dundes submitted his dissertation on the morphology of North American Indian folk tales, in which basically it is built on prop. And I would say this is a rumor, I don't know whether it is true, but Warren Roberts didn't want to give him a doctorate. I don't know whether it is true, but this was, if it is not true, it is a good anecdote to tell. And Dawson pushed forward and said, you know, go ahead. The dissertation is very important, very good. I wrote my dissertation also under this influence, and I called it Narrative Forms in the Haggadah. And I didn't find that prop was applicable to the Haggadah, and I looked at each genre and tried to find out what are the structural forms and features of various forms that you find in the Haggadah. Nevertheless, when I edited the folklore genre book, when I edited for the journal genre, they found that it was a success. Let's say they got the issue, 2 issues were sold out, and they were interested in the 3rd issue. And I wrote to Prop and asked him for a contribution. And he said, you know, I'm too old, I don't have now time to write a new paper, but here is a paper that I suggest that you translate to English, and indeed in the 3rd issue that is not included in the book, there is an article by Prop. So I think my course is different from Warren Roberts. You have to understand that saying different is not really accurate. You learn from all your teachers. You learn from your students. So one thing that I tell my students, and I tell it to the students in my introduction class, that there is a phrase or a statement in the Talmud that says, from all the teachers, from all my teachers I learned. I learned from my rabbis, I learned from my friends, but most of all, I learned from my students. And this is my approach to teaching. My folktale class, I didn't know that I was a threat to you.
Oh, you certainly did.
I should have brought cookies to the class.
It was a fabulous class, but very rigorous.
I try to bring both the anthropological perspectives and the behavioral perspective as Dick Bauman conceived of these definitions. Also, as you know, I had an interest in the history of folklore and the history of the folktale in that regard. So I try to bring more of the history of the folktales. And one of the major features of, let's say, at least the way I see it, is the position of the storyteller in society. Now, my experience of storytellers and my experience with narration is based on my experience in Benin. And in that regard, let's say, and I consider the storytellers the artists of the society, and in many ways sometimes they are marginal people, but they perceive the history of the society from their marginal point of view. I'm not going to get involved in the lecture about it right now, but this was not the conventional wisdom about the relationship between storytellers and the political structure of the society. In Africa in particular, people are talking more about the griots who are supportive of the political establishment. My storytellers were expelled from the city, you know, so with all kinds of symbolic associations with these expulsions and narrations and things of that sort, but they are not the established, they do not support Washington. And so I think Ward Roberts basically took the class out of Steve Thompson, and in many ways he was at heart a folk life person. He went, and for him this was a formative experience, went to Norway and Sweden, and came back out from it with the open-air museums and the folk life experience. And I think in some way his full heart was not in the class, although he wrote a dissertation on the kinds and unkind, a historiographic analysis of the kind and unkind girl that was reprinted and is available to us to study. But, you know, he was also a singer and had a fantastic voice, and sang in the opera of Rhode College, where he studied at the time that Del Heim studied there. So in some way, I think he flourished outside this folk narrative class, and probably we felt it in some way.
These are such great stories, and I'm sure people are starting to get questions. Talking with you is like talking about the intellectual history of the field. So, and I'm a question not on my list, but maybe we can come to later, is to think more about your influence in thinking about genre and folklore. Genre. But let me turn now to the University of Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And we'll talk about your shaping of that program with others, and Don Yoder is here too. And then we're going to talk about Jewish folklore. And so, but first let's talk about University of Pennsylvania and the development of that program.
Well, let me tell you how I got to the University of Pennsylvania. The year that I was job hunting from Bloomington, Indiana, Dick Dawson was in London on a Fulbright. I didn't have any mentor that would get me into the job market. I wrote 50 letters, one of them to the University of Pennsylvania, but I wrote to the Oriental Studies Department, thinking that I can teach Hebrew literature, Midrash and Agadah, and things of that sort. I collected and preserved all the 50 rejection letters. One of them was from from University of Pennsylvania. Moshe Greenberg, a renowned biblical scholar, wrote it in the name of Spicer, who was the major teacher at that time. I was about to go to Nigeria in January 1966. The meeting of the American Folklore Society was together with the American Anthropological Association in Denver, Colorado. And I thought, there was no point for me going. But Dick Dawson called me a week before and said, Dan, I think you should go. And Dick Dawson, I went, and he took me by hand literally from one chairman of department to another, introducing me. And introducing me to Walter Goldschmidt from anthropology UCLA, other people, and so on and so forth. I went to the party that Ken Goldstein had, and we sat on the floor and began to talk. I never met him before. I knew of him, I knew of his book, but I didn't meet him until that time. And he began to talk with me about the definition of folklore, what is folklore, and all the rest of it. And I argued with him, point by point. This was a dialogue in dissent in this way. And Kenny, for what he was, liked that, apparently. McEdward Leach was forced to retire. He was able to squeeze out of the administration by trickery 2 more years. Dan, you'll correct me if I'm wrong. And they stayed there. But then finally they said to him, you have to retire. And the question was what to do with the doctoral students that they had there. They brought Dick Dawson to evaluate the program. And of course he said, you have to establish a program rather than disband the program. Dan Yoder was in religious studies, and I think you were appointed as the chairman of the department. Karen Goldstein was teaching basically as an adjunct and then brought into the program under your chairmanship. And the first letter that was in my mailbox in UCLA was a letter from Michael Jameson, who was the dean of School of Art, they didn't call it School of Arts and Science at that time, of the University of Pennsylvania, asking me, would I be interested in a position in a job at University of Pennsylvania. My appointment to UCLA was 1-year appointment. I'll be out of my mind not to say yes. Well, I'll tell you some dirty stories here, but the souls will forgive me for that. I was invited to the University of Pennsylvania. I didn't give any lecture. I was interviewed. I met Dan for the first time. I met people in the American Civilization Department and other people. And I had a party, Ken Goldstein and Rochelle had a party for me in their house where I met the students. That basically it was a form of an interview, but this is the way it was. And then I returned to UCLA. In my box, I found another mail or not mail, but a memo of the schedule for next year. My name was not there. So I went to Walter Goldschmidt, who was the chairman, and said, Professor Goldschmidt, I am just coming back from University of Pennsylvania, where I had a job interview. And he behaved in the most cliched way and said, take it. He thought it was in the anthropology department, and he said, the anthropology department at University of Pennsylvania is probably the only one that is better than the anthropology department at UCLA. And I complained to my friends in my peers at the department, and then they gave him sort of a slap on his wrist, you didn't behave properly. And a year later, I attended the International Congress of the International Anthropological Association in Japan. And God arranged it in such a way that I was in the elevator together with Walter Goldschmidt. And he said to me, please forgive me. And I'm telling you now, and to confess to you, I didn't have the heart and I didn't forgive him for behaving in that way. This chapter was off. There were, to the best of my knowledge, 4 candidates for the position that Dawson basically said you should have. Dan, you probably, I don't know whether you remember, you'll correct me. I don't want to mention any names that I know because they are excellent folklorists that sort of by fluke did not get the job. The way I was told later on, and maybe this is a lesson that all of you can learn from it, is they asked me, what courses are you ready to teach? Well, I didn't write the courses that I knew anything about, but I wrote about the courses that I would like to teach and that I would like to learn about. So I listed about 9 courses that I was ready to teach. Other candidates who were already in the field wrote the courses that they already taught. And they were 4 or 6 courses, and any administrator would take 9 courses for the same price rather than 4 courses. And this is the way I came to the University of Pennsylvania. For the first months, I stayed in the house of Kenny and Rochelle. They were tremendous hosts as I was apartment and house hunting. What was my sort of contributions to the field, to the department? You have to understand, and I'm glad Dan is here. Dan developed the folk life approach to folklore and introduced folk life into American Folklore Society. And the academy. I came with probably in bringing to folklore this field experience that Kenny did not completely did not bring in. He brought in the McEdward Leach field experience, the arrangements of having singers come to him for the tape recorder and singing and recording them, studying them, talking about them. I came with a different approach. And at the same time, you have to remember also, we were under the influence of Russian formalism. This was also new within the folklore context. Combining the two and having Del Himes in the anthropology department and being a force in the folklore department, and his ethnography of speaking idea just came into the scene. All this made the Department of Folklore, or the program of folklore at the University of Pennsylvania, really a vigorous new program. Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimblet came there, was there for 2 years before she moved to NYU. Tom Burns came for a few years. It was a young department. I know that you look at me now and say, you're young, but I'd say at some point we were. The program at Indiana University at that stage, at that time, was the older program.
Yeah.
You know, although Dawson had open mind to new ideas, new theories, new approaches, but the staff and the places, and it was the establishment. We were the anti-establishment. And we had, not just me alone, say, you know, this was a program, had influence in Europe and in America, I think. So what was done, let's say, was a research, the inside research at the University of Pennsylvania at that point, that I haven't seen the report, Kenny told me about it, that the small departments were the most vigorous departments at the university and had better reputation nationally than the established department that existed there. And I think, Mark, you, as an administrator, I don't know whether you follow this philosophy, but young cells or small cells in the academic scene may have more effect and push the fields forward than sort of the established, well-oiled departments that they have to think about their past, their establishment, and their organization.
I have lots more questions that we didn't get to, but I'm afraid that we'll run out of time if I don't turn this over. So I didn't really ask a lot of questions about Jewish folklore, about Dan's role in international folklore, but I want to let you choose now what you think would be the most important topics. So if you have a question, if you wouldn't mind stepping up to the microphone, otherwise I could repeat the question if you'd like to stay where you are.
Okay, you'll be next.
My dear friend, you've talked a lot. I hate to open up a big subject at the end of the discussion, but I can't resist. As you see it now, how do you see the relation between folklore and other academic disciplines, other kinds of intellectual study, other kinds of intellectual activity in America or in the rest of the world?
You asked a very big and important question. I consider the folklore to be a discipline that, without unbashfully, borrowed from other disciplines. Interdisciplinary approaches are at the heart of folklore studies. Folklore studies in the United States started by an anthropologist and literary scholars. you know, and I think nowadays we should look into psychology, cognitive analysis, and they are also contributing to the study of folk narratives and folklore in general. What is most important, and let's say the reason that your question is somewhat painful to me, is, I'll right now a hobby horse of mine that I said publicly, and I am not a fan of public folklore. As in fact, I wear with an honor the badge of being enemy number one of public folklore. One of the reasons, this is not all the reasons, but one of the reasons is that public folklore siphoned off the academic folklore some of our brilliant students. And they do not engage in research. And they leave vacuum. Now, it is a law of physics. When there is vacuum, it is filled in by other forces. And I find now, in terms of interdisciplinary research, excellent work done by non-folklorists about folklore subjects. I'm just reading, and I'll cite to you a book by a classicist, Ogden, who writes about dragons in classical literature. An excellent book. He refers to Bill Hansen as his folklorist, or in folklore, and so the folklorist would say this and that. He's not a folklorist, but he's a good scholar. There's no question about it. I would like to bring him in. In my research also through the Jewish folklore studies, I came across, and this is through the bibliography, a scholar who studies a term. She did not invent the term, but she used it, a woman by name, a Mayor, geomythology. She is a geologist and a mythologist. And we had some correspondence on email. I never met her in person. And I said, you know, in terms of your work, you should come to the American Folklore Society meetings. And she said to me, well, American folklore left me behind. She wrote an excellent bibliography that appeared in the journal Folklore in England about folklore in classical sources. So I think nowadays we find folklorists in other disciplines, and I'd like to quote them, to bring them in, to have them be part of our effort to investigate and to explore the issues that we are concerned about.
Margie, you have a question?
Yeah, I was just curious.
I'm going to repeat it after you.
Okay, I was just curious. I too heard that rumor about Alan Dundas because Sandy Ives used to talk my ear off about that period when you all were at IU. But did Warren ever moderate his views on structuralism and on prop?
Whether Warren Roberts ever moderated his views on structuralism and prop?
I didn't have the opportunity to talk with him about that. The last times that I met him, and I met him visiting Bloomington, we were friendly.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so he treated me like a former student,
Sure.
and I admired his handwork in his house. You know, so he did a lot of, he was an amateur carpenter, and I don't know whether he moderated his views. But since you mentioned Alan Dundas, I should mention also for the record that the position that I have at the University of Pennsylvania was offered first to Alan Dundas. And he declined it. And so he didn't want to leave Berkeley. I wouldn't go now into the reasons for that, but he declined the positions, and I was a second choice.
Another question? Well, let me then ask you the things that I didn't get to ask.
I did want to ask about Jewish folklore, and more in particular, and your sense of the field as it is now, where it is going, how it holds your attention.
Well, the field held my attention for 3 volumes and 2 more, and probably every commentary that I write about a tale is a nucleus for an article. I'll not be able to write all the 300 articles that I have there, but and this is something that you'll have to find out, and I hope to do some to expand on some of the commentaries. It's opening both new directions in folklore and new directions in Jewish folklore. I think, so this is, I'm praising myself, and this is against a biblical statement that says, let the other praise you and not thy own mouth. But I think I learned from every tale and every annotations that I may explore more than I have ever learned any time from any of the courses that I took and any of the articles and books that I wrote. It is an ongoing learning experience, and I enjoy it and I suffer from it because it's a lot of work. I would say,
Don Yoder has a
okay.
question.
I just wanted to add a little postlude to this marvelous and interesting lecture. I, as Don Yoder, as the chairman of our Folklore and Folklife department at the University of Pennsylvania, after all the quality role of Dan coming to Pennsylvania, I was the person who hired him into our department. I want you all to know that.
Thank you.
And this is a personal tribute of Don Yoder to Dan Ben-Amos.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Could I ask Dan to comment about what he sees as the future of folklore studies, particularly at the University of Pennsylvania?
Yes, that's the same question. Oh, good.
One of the problems that, we talked about it, one of the problems that Kenneth Goldstein neglected to do, or say left us with the problems, is that we did not have a financial foundation in the department, at the university. A private university is a strange animal. There are many programs, many departments, and each of them basically is left, not completely, but left to struggle for its own financial resources. At one point I came to the dean, Rebecca Bushnell at that time, and asked her, you should not treat us, I said, like a social science department that brings in, let's say, sociology or anthropology, brings in money from multi-million research grants, but you should treat us like a humanity program that gets support from the university. And she said, well, the French department has so many students, that freshmen, the undergraduate, that study the language, that these classes support the graduate program at the university. So basically, what I'm now, and I'm not a good fundraiser, and I know that, but what I am trying to do is to establish the financial basis upon which I would like to build a department, bring in new faculty that will be basically brings the cutting edge of research into the university. What we have now, and this is through the ingenuity of some of my colleagues, is what is called a committee on folklore. We have 10 faculty members, and you can see the brochure on the desk, on the table outside there, who are part of the committee on folklore. And those students who take 6 courses will get a certificate in folklore. This is basically an administrative token to paperwork and documents that somebody can hang it on the wall saying you are a bona fide folklorist. The members of this committee, except for Robert St. George, who was educated in folklore, are people who did very important work in their respective fields that border or touches upon folklore, but they are not folklorists. Let's say I'll single out among them Victor Meyer, who is a distinguished sinologist, one of the few people in my departments, and I think in the humanities, who is a member of the American Academy for Arts and Science. And he published a book about popular Chinese folk tales. In a book that he edited on Chinese traditional literature, he has chapter 54, which is devoted to Cinderella, and he gives more profound and historical detailed analysis of the first first written or recorded version of Cinderella in China, better than it is in the article by Jameson on Cinderella that appeared in the 40s in the journal Folklore in England. By the way, this Jameson was the father of Michael Jameson, and who wrote, Papa Jameson wrote 3 lectures on Chinese folklore. And I think, Dan, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Michael Jameson was favorable to the department partially because of the heritage of his father. The future, there is not a week that passes by that I don't write a letter to a person who inquires about the department. One person came to this lecture, to the conventions on my recommendations. We have a student who just finished, who came to study with us with the help of a fellowship that she received from the Taiwanese government. So if we have people who comes with the money, we will admit them. Otherwise, we depend on so far on the good wills of other departments. And I hope that we'll have this goodwill, but I am striving for independence, and I'm looking for the right person that has a pocket that is a little bit too heavy for him, and I will be able to relieve him of that.
If there aren't any other questions, let's thank Dan.